The chamber of the Galactic Council was an architectural marvel, massive, ancient, and humming with quiet power. Towering pillars of obsidian and luminescent gold lined the vast hall, their surfaces etched with the histories of countless species that had risen and fallen under the Council's watchful governance. Delegates from hundreds of worlds gathered, their translucent data tablets flickering with information, their voices hushed with an unusual tension. At the center of it all, Grand Arbiter Zelther, a being of crystalline form, its iridescent facets reflecting a kaleidoscope of colors, stood before the assembly. The glow of its core pulsed rhythmically, indicating controlled urgency. "The matter before us is of utmost importance," Zelther declared, its voice reverberating through the chamber like chimes in a storm. "We have observed the humans. We have analyzed their history, their wars, their insatiable adaptability. We have seen their potential for destruction. And now, we issue this final warning: do not provoke them." A murmur rippled through the delegates. Some scoffed, others exchanged skeptical glances. A hulking representative of the Zorvax Dominion, Supreme Chancellor Korzatak, clicked his mandibles in clear disdain. His exoskeletal form radiated the confidence of a species that had crushed dozens of civilizations beneath its war engines. He leaned forward, his multifaceted eyes gleaming with amusement. "You speak as if these creatures are a threat," he rasped, his voice laced with contempt. "A species that only recently stumbled into the void? They lack the fleets, the numbers, the sheer power to challenge the great empires of this council." Zelther turned its gaze toward him. "You misunderstand," it said evenly. "Their power does not lie in what they possess. It lies in what they become when backed into a corner." A deep silence followed. Another delegate, High Scholar Vezral of the Alari, a species renowned for its intellectual pursuits, adjusted the hovering display beside him. Charts and graphs appeared, historical data points, battle analyses, psychological assessments. "Humans," Vezral began, his voice measured, "are unique among known sapient species. They are not the strongest, nor the fastest. Their technology is not the most advanced. Yet they have conquered every environment they have encountered. Their homeworld, Earth, is a crucible of evolutionary warfare, filled with apex predators and environmental chaos. And yet they thrive." Korzatak snorted. "We have seen other species adapt to hostile worlds. That is no cause for alarm." Vezral gave a slow blink, a gesture of restrained patience. "Perhaps you do not grasp the full weight of their nature. When the Alari first studied human history, we were baffled by the sheer scale of their conflicts. Their civilizations have endured wars so brutal that entire continents were reshaped. They have driven themselves to near extinction, only to rise stronger. Unlike most species, whose warlike tendencies fade with technological progress, humanity's has merely refined itself. They do not break under pressure. They sharpen." The chamber darkened as a projection flickered to life, a recorded transmission from a human military officer during the last war waged on Earth, centuries ago. Smoke and fire consumed the background, yet the man in the recording was calm, resolute. "They thought they could bomb us into submission," he said. "They thought we'd surrender. What they failed to understand is that when you push humanity to the edge, we don't fall. We jump, and we take our enemies with us." The projection ended. A long, uneasy silence followed. Zelther's voice cut through it. "You believe your empire's fleets make you untouchable, Chancellor Korzatak. That your war machines will crush humanity as they have crushed others. But I warn you, humans will not fight like your previous conquests. You expect submission. You will find defiance. You expect fear. You will find fury." The Zorvax leader scoffed. "Your council has grown paranoid. We will handle these creatures as we have handled all others who stood in our way." The murmurs among the assembly grew louder. Some races nodded in agreement with the Chancellor. Others remained silent, considering the weight of Zelther's words. A new voice rose, a gravelly, aged tone belonging to Solaris of the Athari, one of the oldest species in the galaxy. Her species had witnessed the fall of mighty empires and the quiet erosion of once great civilizations. She leaned forward, her deep-set eyes unblinking. "I have seen this pattern before," she said. "Empires that believe themselves invincible. Enemies that seem insignificant. Wars that should have been won before they even began. And yet, history tells us this: the ones who are most dangerous are never those with the greatest strength. They are those with nothing left to lose." Her words lingered in the air like a ghostly echo. Zelther gestured, and another data set appeared, a timeline of species that had come into conflict with humanity in minor skirmishes over the past decades. A pattern emerged: the ones who treated humanity with respect found them to be formidable allies. The ones who underestimated them ceased to exist. "They are relentless," Zelther continued. "Their soldiers do not surrender. Their strategists redefine war itself. Their scientists weaponize necessity. Their civilians, have been known to fight to the last, even when facing impossible odds. There is a reason we have never intervened in their wars. There is a reason we have warned against confrontation. But you refuse to listen." Korzatak rose from his seat, his imposing form radiating defiance. "Enough of this fearmongering," he growled. "The Zorvax Dominion does not cower before primitives. If they dare defy us, we will show them the consequences." Zelther's core dimmed slightly, a sign of something close to sorrow. "Then so be it," it said softly. "You have been warned." The Chancellor turned away, his posture unshaken, his mind made up. The Zorvax Dominion would proceed as planned. They would subjugate the humans, crush their defiance, and establish dominance once more. The Galactic Council watched in silence, knowing that they had seen this before. Knowing that the lesson would not be heeded. And knowing that very soon the galaxy would learn once again why humans should be feared. The Zorvax Dominion wasted no time. The moment their delegation departed the Galactic Council chambers, orders were transmitted across their vast empire. War fleets were mobilized, generals briefed, invasion routes calculated with cold precision. To them, this was just another routine conquest. Humanity was merely another name to be added to the long list of species that had knelt before the might of the Zorvax. Their analysts assured them there was no significant threat. Human colonies were scattered and lightly defended, their ships outdated, their numbers insignificant compared to the Dominion's vast legions. The Dominion's war doctrine had remained unchallenged for centuries: overwhelm, dominate, assimilate. Resistance was a temporary inconvenience, nothing more. The first target was a human frontier colony known as Meridian 7. A lush, mineral-rich world with strategic positioning near key trade routes. The Zorvax commanders anticipated a swift operation, shock and awe tactics, rapid deployment, complete subjugation in a matter of hours. They arrived in force, their warships blotting out the stars, their drop pods streaking through the sky like fiery harbingers of conquest. The initial landings were uncontested. The colony's defenses were minimal: no planetary shields, no orbital defenses, nothing that could pose a legitimate threat to the Dominion's elite forces. The first wave of Zorvax troops advanced through the streets of the colony's largest settlement, expecting to find terrified civilians begging for mercy. Instead, they found silence. No screams, no chaotic evacuations, no desperate pleas. The streets were empty. Buildings stood abandoned, doors left ajar, personal belongings scattered but not looted. It was not panic that had gripped this colony. It was something else. Something the Zorvax did not understand. The first sign of trouble came when communication lines began failing. The second was when supply drops never arrived. The third was when soldiers started vanishing. Entire squads, one by one, gone without a sound. The Zorvax command was baffled. There was no open battle, no massive counteroffensive. Just shadows in the ruins, the occasional glint of movement, the whisper of something unseen. Panic began to take root among their ranks, but they refused to acknowledge it. The mighty Dominion did not fear the dark. And then, the first message came through. A simple, untraceable transmission. Just 3 words. "Run while you can." It was dismissed as a human ploy, psychological warfare meant to unsettle them. But as the hours passed, that unease grew. Their own technology turned against them. Automated sentry turrets reprogrammed to fire on Zorvax patrols. Supply depots rigged with explosives. Vehicles sabotaged, their engines reduced to molten slag. Every attempt to re-establish control only made things worse. Then came the bodies. Zorvax soldiers found strung up on the edges of buildings, their weapons left untouched beside them. Not a single shot fired. Their armor breached with eerie precision, as if their attackers had studied every weak point in their physiology. The officers tried to rally their troops, demanded tighter patrols, stricter formations. But it didn't matter. The humans didn't fight like any enemy they had faced before. There were no direct engagements, no battles on the Dominion's terms. Every attempt to fight back was like striking at mist. By the time the Zorvax regrouped, their enemies had already melted away. This was not war. This was something far worse. The Zorvax prided themselves on military supremacy, but they had never fought an enemy who refused to meet them in open battle. They had always relied on breaking the will of their adversaries through overwhelming force. Yet here, their overwhelming force counted for nothing. The first retreat order was issued within 48 hours. Entire battalions ordered back to fortified zones, abandoning ground they had easily taken mere hours before. What had started as an invasion had become a desperate effort to hold territory, to regroup, to find some way to regain control of the situation. The humans did not allow it. As the Dominion forces fell back, their own escape routes were cut off. Bridges collapsed under seemingly random explosions. Landing zones became death traps, command centers lost power at critical moments. Even their own supply lines turned against them, rations tainted, ammunition stores mysteriously detonated. Panic spread through the Zorvax ranks like a plague. Their soldiers, conditioned for traditional warfare, were unraveling. Fear took root in a species that had never known what it was to be hunted. And for the first time in Dominion history, an entire invasion force was on the verge of collapse without a single full-scale battle. Desperation led to brutal measures. The Zorvax abandoned their own wounded, executed suspected human collaborators, torched entire districts in a bid to flush out their unseen enemy. It changed nothing. Every act of cruelty was met with greater precision, greater ruthlessness. The humans did not retaliate in rage or desperation. They retaliated with cold, calculated efficiency. And then, the final blow. Zorvax command ships in orbit began receiving distress calls, dozens of them. Different locations, different frequencies. All reporting human counterattacks, coordinated and devastating. Entire Dominion outposts were being overrun. And yet, as the commanders listened, a horrifying realization dawned upon them. These weren't real distress calls. They were recordings. The voices of their own fallen soldiers, spliced together, played back at them in an unrelenting loop. The humans had taken their own transmissions and turned them into a weapon, feeding false information, sowing deeper chaos into an already crumbling invasion. And then, the final transmission. Not human. Zorvax. The voice of an officer, his tone laced with something that no Dominion soldier had ever dared express in an official broadcast. Terror. They are not like the others, the voice whispered. They do not fight for survival. They fight for something else. We do not understand them. We never did. And now, it is too late. Then silence. The Zorvax command, once arrogant in their certainty of victory, now faced the reality that they had walked into a nightmare of their own making. Their armies, superior in every measurable way, were being dismantled, not by brute force, but by an enemy that refused to play by the rules. The order was given. Full retreat. Immediate withdrawal. Abandon the planet. Cut losses and flee. It should have been easy. They still had the ships, the firepower, the numbers. But the humans were not done. As the first transport ships attempted to lift off, missile batteries, long thought destroyed, came to life. The skies, once dominated by Zorvax warships, erupted into fire as entire vessels were torn apart. The retreat turned into a massacre. Of the thousands who had landed on Meridian 7, only a handful escaped. And those who did carried something far more dangerous than mere defeat. they carried fear. Not just fear of losing a battle. Not just fear of a failed invasion. Fear of the fact that they had made a terrible mistake. The warning had been clear. The council had tried to tell them. Now, the Zorvaks understood. And they knew, with chilling certainty, that this was only the beginning. The Zorvaks' dominion had never known defeat like this. Their forces had been humiliated, their invasion shattered without even a proper battle. It should have been impossible. The Dominion's war machine had crushed civilizations older and more advanced than humanity. And yet, the humans had turned their own doctrine against them. The survivors of the Meridian 7 campaign returned to their homeworlds, but they were not the warriors they had once been. They carried no glory, no trophies, only the weight of something they refused to put into words. Commanders interrogated them, desperate for explanations. What had gone wrong? Why had an inferior species broken one of the most feared armies in the galaxy? The reports were useless, filled with fragmented testimonies and conflicting accounts. Some spoke of shadows that killed without warning. Others whispered of traps so intricate they seemed woven into the very fabric of the colony. A few swore the humans had known their every move before they even made it. And all of them, without exception, spoke of the fear. The overwhelming, inescapable dread that had settled into their bones long before the first shot was fired. High Command refused to accept it. This was not defeat, they insisted. This was merely an error in strategy. Anomalies. Flukes. The Zorvaks did not lose to lesser beings. They would return. They would adapt. They would crush humanity properly this time. Orders were given. A second fleet, twice the size of the first, was assembled. This time, they would not underestimate their enemy. No gradual occupation, no slow invasion. They would raise entire colonies, bombard planets from orbit until there was nothing left but silence. No more mistakes. No more games. The fleet set course for another human colony, Ventera Prime. It was a critical world, larger and more established than Meridian 7, with a population in the millions. Intelligence suggested the humans would fight here, would try to hold the line. This time, the Zorvaks would force them into open war. They arrived in full force, capital ships bristling with weapons, fighter squadrons ready to launch, legions of ground troops prepared to descend and finish what had begun. But something was wrong. There were no human warships in orbit. No defensive formations. Just silence. It was Meridian 7 all over again. Still, they followed protocol. Scouting teams were sent to the surface, scanning for resistance. The cities were intact. No sign of battle. Yet, once again, there were no civilians. No enemy soldiers. Just empty streets and abandoned buildings. The Zorvaks hesitated. They had seen this before. The ghosts of their last failure clung to them, whispering doubt into their minds. This was not how war was fought. The enemy was supposed to stand and fight. But humanity did not fight by their rules. Then the first explosions hit. Supply ships in orbit detonated in rapid succession, targeted with pinpoint accuracy. Automated defense turrets, systems they had confirmed to be offline, activated without warning, cutting down soldiers before they could react. Communications failed. Squads lost contact with each other. Chaos spread like wildfire. And then came the voices. Human transmissions flooded their comm channels, spoken in the calm, unshaken tones of a predator that already knew the kill was inevitable. You were warned. The Zorvaks scrambled to respond, but their own systems turned against them. Ships in orbit began receiving conflicting commands. Some were told to retreat, others to advance. Targeting arrays malfunctioned. Friend was indistinguishable from foe. The Dominion's discipline fractured under the weight of its own unraveling order. Then came the attacks. This time, the humans did not wait in the shadows. They struck hard and fast, moving with a precision that should have been impossible. They knew exactly where the Zorvaks were weakest, where their defenses were spread too thin, where their command posts could be hit for maximum disruption. And they fought without fear. The Zorvaks had fought thousands of species, but they had never faced an enemy that did not hesitate. humanity's soldiers did not waste time on displays of strength or intimidation. They fought to end battles as quickly and efficiently as possible. They did not fight for survival alone. They fought to win. The Dominion's forces tried to regroup, to organize a counteroffensive, but it was useless. The battlefield belonged to the humans. They dictated the pace, the engagement, the terms. Every attempt at an organized push was shattered before it could begin. Entire battalions were cut down before they even knew where the enemy was coming from. Panic set in. Not among the soldiers, among the commanders. The same commanders who had dismissed the warnings. Who had scoffed at the idea that humanity could be anything more than a minor nuisance. They watched as their grand strategy collapsed in real time, undone not by superior numbers, but by something far worse. Understanding. The humans understood them. Understood their tactics, their movements, their weaknesses. And they exploited them with terrifying efficiency. The retreat order came faster this time. No deliberation, no debates. The fleet turned to flee, abandoning thousands of troops on the surface, leaving entire units behind in a desperate bid to escape. But humanity had planned for that, too. As the first ships attempted to jump into hyperspace, something unexpected happened. Their drives failed. Not all of them, just enough to create chaos. The ships that remained became obstacles, collisions turning the retreat into a disaster. The fleet broke apart, and the humans capitalized on the chaos, striking at the fragmented remains with brutal finality. The Zorvaks were not just defeated. They were dismantled. The survivors who made it back carried the same haunted look as those from Meridian 7. But this time, they did not speak of anomalies. There was no confusion about what had happened. The message was clear. Humanity was not just a species that had fought back. They had prepared. They had studied. They had learned everything there was to know about the Zorvaks before the first shot had even been fired. And now, they had demonstrated exactly what that knowledge meant. The Dominion's leaders, once so confident, now faced an enemy they could not conquer. They had assumed their strength would be enough, but strength meant nothing if the enemy knew exactly how to break it. And worst of all, they knew that humanity had not shown them everything. Because the humans had never been fighting to win a single battle. They were preparing for something far greater. And the Dominion had just given them every reason to see it through to the end. The Zorvaks Dominion's leadership gathered in silence. The High War Council, once a place of rigid discipline and controlled aggression, now held only uncertainty. The defeat at Ventera Prime had not just been another failure, it had shattered the illusion of superiority that the Dominion had held for centuries. Humanity had demonstrated something more dangerous than mere resistance. They had demonstrated control. For the first time, the Council found itself afraid. The Dominion had faced defeats before, had lost battles against powerful empires, but those were setbacks, wars that could be won with time and adjustments. This was different. Humanity had shown a level of preparation that suggested they had never viewed the Dominion as an overwhelming force, but rather as an opponent to be dissected and neutralized. Every engagement had been a demonstration, a carefully orchestrated display of force that left the Zorvaks scrambling to comprehend how they had been so thoroughly outmaneuvered. Admirals and generals debated furiously, searching for an explanation. How had humanity adapted so quickly? How had they predicted every move, disrupted every strategy, shattered every offensive? Some argued that the humans had developed advanced predictive algorithms, capable of anticipating enemy tactics with near-perfect accuracy. Others suggested infiltration, that human spies had embedded themselves deep within the Dominion's command structure. But no evidence of sabotage existed. No transmissions had been intercepted. No technology had been uncovered that could account for their level of insight. One truth was undeniable: humanity had learned from them at a rate that defied logic. Where other species had taken centuries to understand Zorvak's war doctrine, humanity had done it in a fraction of the time. And then they had improved upon it, refining their own strategies to counteract and dismantle the Dominion's every move. It was as if the humans had never been fighting to win individual battles, but to master the very nature of warfare itself. Panic spread through the ranks. If the humans had done this in a single campaign, what would they do in the next? How much had they learned that they had yet to reveal? How much more could they grow? The Supreme Chancellor of the Dominion, a figure who had ruled through absolute authority for over a century, listened without expression as his advisors clashed over theories. He had always believed that strength was the only universal constant, that the Dominion's iron grip on the galaxy was unshakable. Now, that belief was crumbling. For the first time, he questioned whether the Dominion had made a mistake. Not in underestimating humanity, but in attacking them at all. A species like this was not meant to be subjugated. They were meant to be avoided. And yet, the Dominion had already set events in motion that could not be undone. The humans had not simply won battles. They had been provoked into a war that they had not started, but now had every reason to finish. The Dominion's past conquests had been against civilizations that either submitted or were crushed. But humanity did not submit, and they had proven impossible to crush. The Chancellor knew what would come next. The humans had given warnings before. They had allowed the Dominion a chance to retreat, to reconsider. That mercy would not last. The reports were already coming in. Zorvak's outposts near human space had gone dark. Strategic supply lines were being disrupted with precise, calculated efficiency. The Dominion's fleets, once confident in their supremacy, had begun hesitating at the edges of human-controlled territories. There was no declaration of war, no grand proclamation, only the slow, systematic unraveling of everything the Dominion had built. Humanity was not retaliating with brute force. They were dismantling the Dominion, piece by piece, without ever engaging in open conflict. Information networks were being compromised, logistics sabotaged. The war had already shifted, but the Zorvaks had yet to fully understand it. They were still preparing for the kind of war they had always fought, while humanity was already waging a different kind of war entirely. The Dominion's greatest strength had always been its ability to instill fear, to break the will of its enemies before the first battle even began. That advantage was gone. Now, it was the Zorvaks who hesitated, who second-guessed their decisions. Officers delayed movements, questioning whether their strategies had already been anticipated. No one wanted to be the next to suffer the fate of Ventera Prime. The psychological shift was undeniable. The Dominion had always believed itself to be the predator, but now it had the sinking realization that it had become the prey. The Chancellor could see the fear in his advisors' eyes. They were waiting for him to declare a new strategy, a decisive course of action that would turn the tide. But he had nothing to give them. Every logical scenario led to the same outcome. Humanity was not a temporary threat to be suppressed. They were an emerging force that had been given the perfect conditions to evolve into something the galaxy had never seen before. The question was no longer how to defeat them. It was whether the Dominion could survive them. One of the advisors, an older general who had fought in countless campaigns, broke the silence. His voice was measured, but there was no confidence in it. He proposed a ceasefire. A desperate attempt to halt the conflict before it escalated beyond control. Others scoffed at the idea. Surrender was unthinkable. The Dominion had never sought peace with a species they had deemed inferior. To do so now would be an admission of weakness on a scale they had never faced before. But the Chancellor was already considering it. Pride was meaningless if survival was at stake. The Dominion could afford no more losses. Every battle against humanity had only made them stronger, more prepared. What would another year of war look like? 5 years? 10? If they continued fighting, they might not just lose the war. They might cease to exist. A decision had to be made. If they waited too long, the choice would be made for them. The Chancellor rose from his seat, the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He issued a single command. Contact the humans. Not to threaten. Not to demand. To negotiate. The message was sent. It was short, precise, stripped of the usual arrogance that had defined the Dominion's previous dealings with weaker species. There was no posturing, no veiled threats, just a direct request for negotiations. For the first time in its history, the Dominion had reached out to an enemy not to dictate terms, but to ask what terms might be given. Silence followed. Hours stretched into days. The Dominion's highest-ranking officials waited in suffocating uncertainty, their once unshakable confidence eroded by the absence of a response. Had they waited too long? Had they already lost control of the situation? Then, finally, a reply came. Humanity had agreed to meet. But the details of that meeting were dictated entirely by them. The Dominion would not choose neutral ground. They would not send a fleet to intimidate or control the engagement. Instead, a single envoy was permitted to travel, unarmed, alone, to a location of humanity's choosing. There would be no escorts, no security measures in place to guarantee the envoy's safe return. The meaning was clear. The Dominion was not in a position to demand assurances. They would meet humanity as supplicants, not conquerors. The Chancellor himself chose to go. It was an unprecedented decision, but he knew no one else could represent the Dominion at this moment. No military leader, no admiral or general, could salvage this situation. The fate of the Dominion now rested not on strategy, but on diplomacy. And so, he boarded a single shuttle, stripped of any symbols of power, and traveled deep into human space. When he arrived, the first thing he noticed was the silence. There was no grand reception, no formal welcoming party. Humanity did not seek to impress with ceremony or intimidation. The meeting room was Spartan, functional. And waiting for him, seated with the same calm confidence that had defined humanity's actions throughout the war, was a single human representative. The Chancellor had prepared for this moment with meticulous care. He had reviewed every possible approach, every argument that might appeal to human reason. But as he sat across from his counterpart, he realized how little power he actually held. The humans had no reason to bargain. They had already won, not just militarily, but psychologically. They had shattered the Dominion's belief in its own invulnerability. And yet they were here, talking. The Chancellor did not waste time with pleasantries. He acknowledged what was obvious. The Dominion had underestimated humanity. They had misjudged their capabilities, failed to understand their nature. He did not offer excuses. There were none to give. Instead, he asked the only question that mattered. "What do you want?" The human representative studied him for a moment before answering. And when the answer came, it was not the demand for surrender the Chancellor had expected. It was something far worse. "You will never come near us again." There was no demand for tribute, no call for reparations, no plea for an alliance. Humanity did not seek power over the Dominion. They sought distance. They wanted nothing to do with them. They were not interested in ruling over a defeated empire, not concerned with carving out territory or gaining resources. They simply wanted the Dominion gone from their space, forever. The Chancellor felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not relief. Not anger. Something colder. Irrelevance. Humanity did not see them as a threat anymore. They had moved beyond the war, beyond the Dominion itself. The conflict had never been about dominance or revenge. It had been a necessary lesson, one humanity had already learned and moved past. For the first time in his life, the Chancellor understood what it meant to be dismissed. He tried to salvage something, anything. He offered trade, technological exchanges, even non-aggression pacts. But every offer was met with the same response. "You will never come near us again." The realization was slow, but it was absolute. Humanity did not fear the Dominion. They did not hate them. They simply had no use for them. The Dominion had always believed in the rule of strength, that the strong dictated the fate of the weak. But humanity had introduced something far more dangerous, the power to decide who was even worth acknowledging. The Chancellor agreed to the terms. There was no other choice. The Dominion would withdraw from human space, dismantle any installations bordering their territories, and never again interfere with their affairs. The return journey was quiet. When he arrived back in Dominion space, the other leaders were waiting for some kind of reassurance. Some declaration that they had secured a path forward. But he had none to give. He simply told them the truth. The war was over. Humanity was gone, not in the physical sense, but in a way that mattered far more. They had withdrawn, vanished into the unknown reaches of space, leaving the Dominion behind. No further communications came. No trade agreements followed. The Dominion had been excised from their reality, cast aside like an irrelevant relic of an older age. For the first time in history, the Zorvax Dominion had encountered an enemy that did not just defeat them, but left them behind. And that was far worse than any conquest.